Hello and welcome to Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear AI researchers chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we'll provide summaries and discussion about some of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI newsletter at lastweekin.ai for articles we did not cover in this episode. I'm one of your hosts, Andrei Kurenkov.
And I'm your other host, Dr. Sharon Zhao. This week, we'll be covering how AI can speed up sepsis detection to prevent hundreds of deaths. We'll talk about the generative art AI rival to DALL-E called Midjourney and how they're doing. We'll talk about how clinicians can build trust with machine learning by using it. And we'll also talk about how robots learn in the wild. Finally, we'll be talking about how startups are using AI to help doctors fight burnout and also stealth submarines and how AI will make them less stealthy. We'll end with a note on how, AI is generating a lot of cool things like absurd food photography and generated book jackets based on the literary titles. So a fun set of stories and lots on medicine, actually. All right, well, that's it. Let's kick off the first one.
All right, so let's get going with our first story in applications and business. AI speeds up sepsis detection to prevent hundreds of deaths. So this news story is about a targeted real-time early warning system, which is an AI system developed at Johns Hopkins University that catches symptoms of sepsis hours earlier than traditional methods and makes it so patients are 20% less likely to die because of it. And an extensive study that just came out in Nature Medicine with a lot of data, a lot of real trials in hospitals, they collected the data and showed that to be the case. And this is a really big deal because it's a very common occurrence in hospitals. About 1.7 million adults develop sepsis every year in the US, and more than 250,000 of them die. And sepsis is this condition that's pretty hard to catch because the symptoms are fever and confusion, and so it can be kind of mixed up with other things. So really catching it as early as possible is essential, and this system, which combines data from their medical records as well as real-time sensor readings, can really do that seemingly much better and does lead to, way lower mortality, which is really exciting.
This was also a huge study. Actually, over 40,000 clinicians were involved across 5 different hospitals. So, it wasn't just a single hospital and not a single doctor, just tons of people. And they actually used AI in treating 590,000 patients. The system also reviewed 173,900 previous patient cases. So this was a very large study. This is quite a bit covered here. So I'm glad that medical AI studies are starting to get so large scale. This is also, very, very impressive.
Exactly. And we cover it in this section and not research, actually, because it is being spun out. So there's a company named Baidu Health, which was spun out from Johns Hopkins, which has led and managed deployment and is also partnering with 2 of the largest electronic health record providers, Epic and Cerner, to ensure that this tool can be implemented at our hospitals. So this is a case where it's not just sort of early on research, which we often talk about. This is actually something that's developed, that's been seemingly, heavily tested and may actually be coming soon to a lot of hospitals, which is really, really cool that this specific application of AI does seem to have this much of an improvement over traditional, previous methods for sepsis detection.
Absolutely. And on to our next article. Inside Midjourney, the generative art AI that rivals DALL-E. So there's a company called Midjourney, and it also creates a generative AI tool similar to what DALL-E provides, which is OpenAI's text-to-image generator. And Midjourney opened its closed beta, allowing basically anyone to sign up for an account. And so you can just go on, sign up for an account, and just generate some of these fake images. And of course, DALL-E, I actually recently did open it up too, but for a while it was a closed invite only type thing. And so this was actually a stress test of their system. So Midjourney actually just posted on their Discord server and just said, for the next day, the next 24 hours, we're just going to open it up to everyone and see if our servers are actually ready for this. And so it's very exciting that, this kind of tool is being opened up to a lot of different people. There's this, this is a free trial period. People get a limited number of generations before you have to buy a subscription. Also, the cheapest plans basically allow 200 images per month for just $10. And then the premium tier is unlimited generations for $30 for each month. And that's just for non-commercial use. If you want to use for commercial use, there's other things. And specifically, actually, for NFTs, you have to pay 20% royalty on any revenue over $20,000 per month. So if you do create an NFT that's very targeted to certain people. But I have seen actually people generate NFTs with DALL-E. So I think OpenAI actually very quietly took away that restriction I saw on Reddit. This is all coming. And it's very exciting because this means everyone can use it. And Midjourney does produce, slightly different images from DALL-E. It actually is particularly good at creating different environments, like fantasy ones or dystopian sci-fi ones, has dramatic lighting. Kind of looks like things are from a video game. And so a couple of my favorites are interior of a spaceship filled with lush plants and photorealistic minions inside the Windows XP background, which is, by the way, hilarious because it is the Windows XP background in an oil painting with the minions in there. So yeah, pretty funny. What did you think? Did you play with it?
Yeah, I like these generations. It's interesting to see another alternative kind of tool. And there's been, I think people maybe aren't as aware of kind of since the VQGAN clip kind of explosion, there's been a bunch of little different websites like Night Cafe. But the quality of these generations really is pretty impressive. It's not DALL-E level, but it's maybe better than DALL-E Mini or something like that. And I think it's pretty exciting that an independent group that isn't sort of the massive behemoth that is OpenAI was able to put something like this together. Is quite cool. And, hopefully that means that people will have access to these kinds of tools, even if they can't afford to pay the amount that OpenAI would ask for, or maybe if they want an API for their own project. I could see a lot of good outcomes if there could be more players rather than just OpenAI releasing DALL-E 2, right?
Why would anyone want an API for their own project, Andre?
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, actually, let's move on to our lightning round. So first up, we have OpenAI expands access to DALL-E 2, its powerful image generating AI system. So just last week, and I do wonder if the Midjourney story was kind of released because of this, maybe not, but last week, OpenAI made access to DALL-E 2 wider. It announced in a blog post that it will expedite access to customers on the waitlist with the goal to reach roughly 1 million people within the next few weeks. And I actually got my DALL-E 2 access last week.
Woohoo!
And it allowed you to commercialize your creation. So now they actually are starting to charge for generations, and they have a whole kind of spiel on you can use it on the copyright and so on. So exciting times. Yeah, people can use DALL-E 2 to make NFTs, I guess. I don't know.
I know. No.
And our second lightning round story, we have Amazon-owned self-driving firm Zoox seeks to test robotaxi in California. And it's about how Zoox, the self-driving company that is now owned by Amazon, has been bought out several years ago, said that it is gearing up to try and launch its robotaxi business. And this is vehicles that have no pedals or steering wheels. So they are trying to apply to the experiment to test. And of course, they will not be able to have safety drivers in the car, presumably, given that there are no wheels or safety pedals. So that's cool. I would want to ride one of those, I think.
I'm excited to see how they're doing after the acquisition. I feel like this is a big step for Amazon, with Zoox here. So excited to see where this goes and how they actually do. I know Amazon is really good at logistics as a company, and would love to see how well they do in this space. I see them as a very good, good at being practical kind of company and delighting the customer. So I'm just curious how they fare compared to the other companies out there.
Definitely. And they've been in the game for a long time. They're one of the, big companies going pretty early on, maybe a decade ago or something like that. So they've been working on this for a long time and have a lot of talent. So this is pretty exciting to see some hopefully progress towards pushing some of this technology out of the company.
And on to our next lightning round article. Baidu unveils latest autonomous electric vehicle, Apollo RT6. So Baidu, which is the Chinese search engine similar to Google, they actually unveiled their latest electric autonomous driving car on Thursday, and it's called Apollo RT6, and it'll be part of Baidu's robotaxi fleet. And this is just pushing towards autonomous driving in China. It actually makes me think of a Tesla a little bit.
Yeah, it kind of does. And it's interesting. We've been seeing so many stories about self-driving of Cruise and Zoox and now this. Seems like a lot of things are happening this year for self-driving, like in the real world.
It's kind of funny because actually it's when the hype has been dying down and a lot of people are like, this isn't going to happen. But then maybe it's happening when people... when it's not happening. Yeah. And our last lightning round article, Neural Sleeve is a bionic leg wrap that uses AI to correct walking patterns. So this is a startup, Psionic, and in collaboration with Fuse Project, which is Eve Bahar's design studio. That's fairly well known. They together developed a bionic wearable, and this uses actually electric pulses and AI to correct muscle movements in people who have limited mobility. And it basically looks like a wrap around your leg to help it kind of zap you to be able to walk much more functionally. And this is for people who have difficulties walking, which might be caused by multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, spinal cord injuries, and even strokes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very cool. Moving on to our research and advancement news stories, we have novel methods allow robots to learn in the wild from Science Daily. So this is covering the paper Whirl, Human to Robot Imitation in the Wild, that was recently published and presented in New York at the RSS conference. And it's a pretty cool new piece of robotics research that shows how you could very quickly and easily demonstrate to a robot how to do something. So in robotics, or broadly speaking, there's a few paradigms to teach agents how to do things. You can have them do trial and error, which is reinforcement learning, but that takes a very long time. And you could also have imitation learning, where you give them demonstrations of what to do, but that can be difficult because, well, you need to remotely control the robot. how does that work? May not be trivial to actually give a demonstration. And so what's cool here is you can just do the task yourself, like open a drawer or, open the refrigerator, close the refrigerator, wipe the whiteboard, these kinds of household things. Just do it once, record yourself, and the robot will actually then use that and try to match kind of a visual effects on the world through video. So you only need to do it once. You don't need to remote control the robot. And the robot can pretty quickly kind of recreate what you did and succeed in doing the task. So pretty cool new research, and definitely does outperform some of these other existing techniques that typically require a lot more data and demonstrations.
This looks super cool. It's just awesome now that people can really just actually demonstrate something as a human in the real world, and the robot can do it. Because I think typically what, imitation learning or just human demonstrations, what they actually looked like was not really the human actually physically going in there and doing it, right, Andre? It was often it's just like clicks or, where your mouse is and what keys you're pressing kind of thing. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's been a lot of sort of kinesthetic teaching. So you actually have to actually guide the robot's hand to do the task, which is not intuitive. And you can also use VR or video game controllers, but that's not easy to do. So this is definitely much more easy to do. You just need to have a camera pointed at you and you do it, and the robot can then kind of figure it out. So I think it's not an entirely new idea, but this is a very nice manifestation of it and uses some pretty elegant ideas.
Yeah, this makes me think this is true imitation learning, or true watching what the human actually does, because this is how we watch other humans do things. And so, this is
very, very similar to how we do things, exactly. And this was, by the way, from Carnegie Mellon's Robotics Institute, which does a lot of robotics type stuff like this. Is maybe less known, but CMU is quite the leader in robotics.
And to be clear, it's not any task out there. Like you mentioned, it's common household tasks, opening a drawer or turning on the sink, or taking a trash bag out of the trash can. I did think that was kind of nice. It seemed like, this is not necessarily a super easy object to necessarily even carry, but yeah.
Yeah, it has some limitations. It relies on sort of a set of primitives, so it isn't like a fully expressive. It can't do anything. It kind of has blocks that it can kind of build in a specific way to achieve some ends. So it's not going to kind of do very complicated things. But the core idea of it, which is essentially just, the robot tries to do what the human did, and then you remove the human and the robot from the video. So you have this video, shot of both, and you try to make the videos the same. It's a very intuitive idea, and I do think it can kind of be pushed further, probably.
And on to our next article. Clinicians can build trust with machine learning through experience. So this is a new study published in Nature Partner Journal's Digital Medicine. And the study was led by Johns Hopkins University, as well as University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it was basically a series of interviews with 20 doctors, 20 clinicians, who used a machine learning system to monitor for sepsis in their practice, similar to our earlier article. And they basically had the finding that, over time, through experience with interacting with a machine learning system, clinicians can build trust to work with them. So this is more of a qualitative study. And they had, 4 major findings that they kind of delineated here. So one is that clinicians didn't see a big difference between machine learning systems and traditional. clinical decision support systems. But then this also, there's pros and cons to that. Pro is maybe that it does flow into their workflow if they're already using decision support systems, but the con is that they might not understand what's going on with the machine learning, and that could cause misinterpretation of the results. The second is that clinicians used machine learning systems for both diagnosis and post-diagnosis care. So this means that they used the system to diagnose patients, and they also used it afterwards to monitor patients. And the third is, while many doctors lacked an understanding of what was going on with the machine learning system, they were still willing to adopt it over time, especially after reading studies about how the system is validated or if the system received a positive review from another expert, which makes sense. And then finally, the study showed that while clinicians, they were excited about the possibility of machine learning, they still were concerned about over-reliance on using it within clinical settings.
Yeah, exactly. So pretty detailed article describing all of this, quite interesting. The paper itself is titled "Human-Machine Teaming is Key to AI Adoption, Clinicians' Experience with a Deployed Machine Learning System." And it does feel to me like the things described here are going to be probably kind of the experience that a lot of creative professionals, or just generally, a lot of people in many careers and skill sets get as they start using new AI tools, where you will probably not understand kind of the machine learning system's internal functionality. But then as you grow to understand it on a more intuitive level of the behavior of it rather than the technical implementation of it, you will find a way to kind of be comfortable and know its limits and know kind of this whole dynamic where you can maybe collaborate, or you can think of it as supplementing you and making your job easier, just like any tool. So interesting to see the description that's quite detailed in the context of clinicians. And I guess it's good news given what we just talked about earlier with regards to sepsis.
Yes, and I think this is actually pretty consistent with my experience, even just testing these systems in research with clinicians at Stanford Hospital. So definitely found that clinicians became much more, if they were just a little bit more educated on the system, they trusted things a little bit more. There's definitely still over-reliance. Even when you know you're over-relying on something, you still end up over-relying on it. So there's still the risk of that for sure. And I still think there's better methods for explaining things, especially when things are really and truly uncertain. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done on the user experience of these potential products that do go out.
And something we should mention, actually, this is the sepsis system here is the same one as the one we talked about in the beginning. It's the targeted real-time early warning system.
Nice.
TRUES. So yeah, looks like they've got a few papers, coming out, and it's interesting to see that they not only have this more quantitative results paper, but also this more qualitative article that deals more with interviews of clinicians and their experience. So definitely good to see both, I would say. And moving on to our lightning round. First up, we have machine learning identifies gun buyers at risk of suicide, which is about a new study from the Violence Prevention Research Program at UC Davis, which, as the title suggests, may help identify handgun purchasers who are at high risk of suicide, which would be useful given that handguns are often used for that purpose. After that, we have Microsoft launches simulator to train drone AI systems. And so this is about this platform to train autonomous aircraft AirSim, which is basically a flight simulator for drones, which can now be used to train and develop software for controlling them.
Next article is open source platform enables research on privacy preserving machine learning. So actually the biggest benchmarking data set to date for machine learning technique designed with data privacy in mind has been released by researchers at the University of Michigan, and it is open source. And specifically, it is using a federated learning, benchmark on federated learning. Last article is DeepMind and UCL's Stochastic MuZero achieves SOTA results in complex stochastic environments. And so this is a new approach, and it achieves best performance that's comparable or better than state-of-the-art methods in both complex single and complex multi-agent environments, while maintaining very good performance on the original MuZero.
Yeah, so it's a cool step forward where now you have probabilistic on certain environments and not just stuff like Go, where it's always the same outcome regardless of your action.
It's gonna make the game harder and harder.
Harder and harder. Oh. Moving on to stochasticity. Next, we're gonna get to robotic manipulation. Who knows what else? But moving on to our society and ethics and news stories. First up, we have, again, about medicine. Meet the startups using AI to help doctors fight burnout. This is from Fast Company, and it surveys a fair number of different startups, as it says, to help make the overall experience of caretaking in the healthcare system more efficient and basically make it so fewer doctors burn out, as the title says. And this is definitely very important. Even before COVID-19, 30% of physicians said they felt burned out. And that, of course, got even worse during COVID, which was, one can only presume, nightmarish. And the situation is dire, but at least there are some things that may help. So some examples they cite here are things like a system to speed up pre-visit evaluation. So this is, for instance, being done by the San Francisco-based HealthNote startup, which streamlines patient intake, which is this whole pre-visit evaluation, with a text-based AI chatbot. There's other examples here as well. For instance, about transcribing doctor's notes. So there's this company, DeepScribe, which is a voice-based digital assistant that allows a doctor to have a normal conversation with a patient and then take care of writing it instead of having the doctor themselves put it into the program or whatever, which seems like definitely would be a good thing to have, where you don't need to just write down stuff, you can just talk. And there are quite a few other examples. So kind of a positive article, and it's cool to see kind of a variety of ways people are finding to use AI to streamline taking care of people.
I think this actually does help wedge AI into the healthcare system, especially when doctors are really being overwhelmed. And if there's any way for this stuff to help, it's really useful. I've heard really good things actually from doctors about some of these transcription services. So doctors themselves saying, I can't live without this. This is so great. But of course, the article also mentions there are physicians who do very much doubt this. And there was actually a survey in 2019 of 1,500 doctors across the world, and specifically found that those in the US expressed the most skepticism of AI, so 49%. But again, that was before the pandemic, so I'm actually very curious what they think now. Maybe they're more skeptical, I don't know. But maybe for some of these specific use cases, they're less skeptical, which is what I found very anecdotally.
It's true. Yeah, it's hard to say. I think This article does cover also helping with triage, so AI tools that are designed to help flag patients who need critical care. And it lists several companies like RapidAI, VizAI, Arteris that all have FDA approval for algorithms that detect signs of stroke and brain bleeds and things like that. So maybe as the healthcare system has some of these tools become part of it, so DeepScribe or some of these triage tools, it will become kind of a more concrete, familiar concept to doctors, and there will not be the skepticism. With some experience with these systems, they'll kind of understand that probably there are a lot of use cases where AI can help.
And on to our next article, will AI steal submarines stealth? So submarines, we've been developing much faster and much quieter submarines, and they've just been working in stealth to avoid enemies detecting it. And there have been a lot of technologies around that. And actually, the article notes that in the early 1960s, nuclear-powered submarines began to emerge, and these are like very, very quiet submarines, very hard to detect with radar and active sonar. There's very, very little out there to detect it. But that being said, they still emit some kind of very low frequency noises that can be picked up from far away by various networks. And so it's a game of hide and seek. And these submarines are really expensive. So it costs about $2.8 billion for each of these nuclear-powered submarines, according to the U.S. Congressional Budget Office. And that's super, super expensive for just one of these things. And the whole goal is to be stealthy with them underwater. However, over time, and actually more recently, people found maybe AI can help use some of the more recent sensors, or use some of the sensors out there now to be able to detect and find these submarines in the near-ish future. And some of these sensors that AI might work on and get data from are the LiDAR sensors. So LiDAR is being used, in self-driving very often. It's also pretty expensive, especially if you wanted it to have really good range and to actually be installed on satellites. And the other sensor is magnetic anomaly detection, or MAD instruments. And these kind of monitor the Earth's magnetic fields and can detect subtle disturbances, maybe by a submerged submarine, the metal hull of it. And, it works at low altitudes or underwater, but it actually is not sensitive enough. So the article also covers some mobile sensors that are less expensive, but can roam in the seas themselves. Has a pretty funny, interesting picture of a robo shark by the Chinese Navy, which honestly, it looks pretty cool and kind of hilarious.
It looks like a robo shark.
Yes, it is undeniably a shark, and it's robo, and it looks completely generated by DALL-E. So I would give it a good look. And then the U.S. is also developing drones that are, only $15,000 each, but they're loud, and people are not sure whether that would be stealthy enough for the open seas.
Yeah, so, wow. I did not realize submarines cost that much.
That's insane.
$2.8 billion for one of them, one nuclear-powered submarine. Wow.
It does make me wonder if a private company should start working on this, because my guess is some of the costs might not be real, just like with SpaceX.
Yeah, that's true. But I guess there's probably less demand to go.
That's right.
Below water in such a way that you cannot be detected and into space. But the article is kind of pretty important in part because it is, a big deal to have the capacity to have submarines. It's kind of relied upon to have a fair portion of a given country's military forces exist in this kind of invulnerable position. So even even if there's a potential to reduce submarine stealth or even, make it impossible to be fully stealthy, that would definitely impact kind of the possibilities for military strategy and these kinds of things. So yet another area where AI is making an impact, apparently, that definitely I did not even think would be something related, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting how much perception influences defense strategy, because you don't have full knowledge of what the enemy or anyone else knows. And so it's just interesting that even if, we say, hey, it's possible for AI to do this, then it becomes a threat, even if it actually isn't actively being done and actually maybe even doesn't work. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I do have to wonder if we'll get more of these RoboShark. Like you get RoboSharks at first and then get robot fish, and then you get basically a whole little underwater drone division. So not only will drones be in the air, they will be underwater. And I'm sure that is an area being worked upon. So
no more real fish, just drone fish. Drone sea anemones, what do you think?
I'd get that as a pet, probably.
As a pet? That's where it all starts. Then it'll take over.
Definitely. And speaking of that, moving on to our fun and neat stories, where we get to enjoy the more silly sides of AI, starting with the absurd AI-generated professional food photography made with DALL-E 2 from Mini Maxier's blog. And it's pretty much what the title says. It's a bunch of absurd AI-generated professional food photography. We'll link to it so you can see some of these images for yourself. But unsurprisingly, being from DALL-E 2, these are quite impressive and in some cases, I think, fairly delightful. I really liked the look of the Cobb salad and the shape of the robot emoji image here. What did you think of this?
I know you wanted to eat that one. Would it make the salad much more enjoyable for you?
I think I would emotionally enjoy the experience more. It wouldn't taste better, but I would have a better time overall.
Yeah. And my favorite one, which I, began salivating over, was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the shape of a Rubik's Cube. And so, I mean, it looks great.
It's one of these things where, it used to be the case that, the AI could not possibly do something like this. And then you give it a prompt and it just does something that's totally reasonable. So I don't even know, as a listener of this podcast, can you imagine an image of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the shape of a Rubik's Cube? I'm not sure if you could, but DALL-E 2 could, and it is, very reasonable.
That's funny. So, people can't even imagine some of these things, but once they see it, they can confirm it. I think that's really interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, that comes to show that generation is much harder than what we call discrimination in AI. I know that word is not really great here, but just to be able to classify or be able to detect or be able to confirm something is much easier, or delineate something is much easier than creating it, than generating it. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. And imagining it, even. Exactly. You don't even have to, not necessarily even drawing it, because that's way beyond my abilities, but even just imagining it can be challenging sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, how would you make a peanut butter sandwich in the shape of Rubik's Cube? Well, according to DALL-E, you would just make cubes out of peanut butter and cubes out of jelly and just stack them.
It's great.
Which is
it's so great.
Oh my god, it looks ridiculous.
It does. I do want to eat it though. So
it does look tasty, but I did also really get a kick out of the hamburger in the shape of 5 dimensions, which. Definitely point for trying. I don't know.
I was literally thinking the same thing. It was really trying at the idea of what we kind of imagined in a sci-fi way of what 5 dimensions look.
Yeah.
Like what a sci-fi movie would show us, by the way.
A trippy image of hamburgers at school. And the person who did this, MuZero, who writes a quite popular blog, actually created Twitter and Instagram account with more of these kinds of AI-generated food. So it's called Weird AI Chef. You can find it at Weird AI Chef on Twitter and at Weird AI Chef on Instagram. We'll link to them in the description of this episode and on lastweekin.ai. But feel free to just Google them. It's a lot of fun.
And on to our last article. If AI generated book jackets based on literary titles, ... And so these are exactly what you think it says there, but this is in the New York Times. And they basically looked at different book covers and used that as the prompt for the AI. And there were some, interesting ones out here. I like the book Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. So that looks pretty trippy and hallucinogenic, which the book is very hallucinogenic. So I thought that was very, that made sense. The color scheme, I don't know where I got it from. And New York Times also mentions that it's a teal and salmon color scheme. So yeah. Any favorites?
Yeah. These are by using Crayon, which is the new name of DALL-E Mini. I also really liked the Infinite Jest one. It felt like it, was conceptually something that could work.
I could see it as a real cover, yeah.
Exactly. And there's also one for On Earth, Briefly Gorgeous, which was a pretty cool image. In general, I'm a big fan of prompting these things with kind of purely abstract ideas, like, the feeling of sadness. You prompt it with a feeling of sadness and just see what it outputs, right? Because there's no, that's an incredibly abstract interpretive thing, like Infinite Jest, right? What should you draw for that? I don't know. So I find this kind of thing a lot of fun, and I got a kick out of some of these generations for sure.
I hope they now start using Midjourney or the OpenAI or the DALL-E one, because I think also Mini DALL-E. I think they're improving Mini DALL-E as we speak, but I think the other two are still kind of leading in the generation.
Yeah, and it's funny to see New York Times getting in on all of the fun now. Pretty much all of us cannot resist the draw of playing with this language to image stuff, I guess. It's just too much fun.
And it's so exciting that my parents can finally understand what I work on. It's pretty exciting.
And with that, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast. Once again, you can find the articles we discussed and plenty of other ones at our newsletter at lastweekin.ai.
Subscribe to us and please leave us a rating if you like the show. We love your reviews, and we will be happy to announce them if you so please on our podcast. We're very, very grateful for them. So thank you so much.
Indeed, we would appreciate reviews, but even if you don't, please do just keep tuning in. We apparently have listeners, which is really enough for us to keep doing this. So yeah, keep tuning in and we'll keep telling you about AI.
It's great to have listeners, plural. Much better than listener.